to diversity. Um, my name is Audrey Gaines. I am a member of the Town of East Hampton Anti-Bias Task Force. I have my guest here today, Michael A. Butler. Michael is also a member of the Anti-Bias Task Force, and Michael lives in Sag Harbor in the Eastville section. He has curated numerous exhibitions. His exhibits in Sag Harbor. Michael has many professional careers spanning from New York to all the way to East Hampton. Michael, let's start talking about your Eastville. Let's start talking about where you live.
Well, thank you, first of all, for having me, Audrey. We've been friends for many, many years, and it's good to see you in person once again.
Yes.
Finally, yes. Hopefully, things are moving upward and onward. Now, as you know, I live in the neighborhood of Eastville in Sag Harbor on Eastville Avenue. Now, Eastville derived its name because it was situated somewhat east of the main part of the village of Sag Harbor. Now, initially, it was called Snooksville, after a family named Snooks, who had several properties in the area. Now, over time, unfortunately, the Snooks family went through some financial troubles and started to sell off the properties in the area. Now, Eastville is very unique in the sense that it's one of the few, if not the only, section or neighborhood on Long Island that was comprised of Native Americans, African Americans, and European people, all of whom lived in this one neighborhood, working very similar jobs. A lot of the men were whalers or they did farming types of things. The women did sort of home-based items such as seamstress work. Some of them also took in laundry, some domestic work, and they all almost had small farms also. They would make their own produce, they would sell it downtown. A couple of the families were candy makers. Now, Eastville is still a vibrant area. It's basically bound by Hempstead Street, Liberty Street, and Eastville Avenue, and Hampton Street. Although some people have said that Eastville is also, at one time, had a much larger area, but it's basically those 4 blocks that I mentioned that comprise that area.
It's very unique because I don't believe there is any place like Eastville, even as you know, all through Long Island. I've never heard of any place like that. I got to know a little bit about Eastville by being at the Eastville Historical Society, and was fascinated with all of the people who lived in Eastville and around Eastville. There's a cemetery there that really is fascinating too. What, you know, what about that cemetery there?
The cemetery has an interesting history. It was built or organized in 1857. It was part of the St. David AME Zion Church. They're both on the same block, Eastville Avenue. The church was formed because in Sag Harbor at the time, most of the people of color, the Native Americans and African Americans, were buried in segregated sections of the other cemeteries. The old burying ground located at the Presbyterian Church has a basically segregated section at the southeast corner where Portuguese sailors, African Americans, and Native Americans are buried. Oakland Cemetery opened up around 1840, which also has a very small segregated section. So when the church formed in 1840, those congregants were members of either the Presbyterian or the Methodist Church. They became so numerous that they decided they wanted their own church. And then 17 years later, they opened up the cemetery. The property was bought by 2 women named Solomon, Hannah Solomon and Anna Maria Solomon. And it was the trustees of the church. It was signed over to the trustees of the church. And then in 2001, the Eastville Community Historical Society then gained ownership. It was deeded over by the conference of the AME Zion Church. And so the Eastville Historical Society is now the current owner. Over the ensuing years, unfortunately, there has been a lot of vandalism. A lot of the stones were removed, knocked over. A lot of the family plots had brass railings with marble corners. Most of that has disappeared. Around 1982, Kathy Tucker, who was the historian of the Historical Society, undertook it by herself with a couple of other members to actually write down all of the names of the extant gravestones that were still there at the time. So even though some of those stones have also disappeared, there's a good record of who is currently buried in the church. But towards the back, there's a large swath of vacant ground.
Wait a minute, was the record is in the church itself now?
No, we were able to glean these just from the stones themselves, from the historical record. I'd done some research, found newspaper articles that said, well, this individual is buried in the cemetery on Eastville Avenue. There may not have been a headstone, but we're going by this printed matter that will tell us who's buried in there. So there is a sign in the cemetery that lists all of the known people that are buried there. But as I was saying, towards the back, there's a very flat, open, grassy area, which some of the old members of the community say there are still bodies buried down there. Either they could not afford a headstone, the headstone was made out of wood, so it rotted over the decades. But we did some years back have a ground-penetrating radar conducted. They came back inconclusive. They really could not tell some of these depressions of the dark markings, whatever, what was actually down there. So at some point, we'd like to have another one conducted to really determine the actual grave sites.
Yeah. Now, I heard that the church was actually used as an underground railroad. Is that true? I mean, there's like talk about, you know, people have said that. I think people have, someone's written a book, you know, to that, you know, that there was an underground railroad. We even show you in the church where the Underground Railroad actually was, you know. So talk about that a little bit.
That is still open for a debate. Unfortunately, some years back when I was president of the Historical Society, the Eastville Historical Society, I did contact the New York State Office of the Underground Railroad. That's not the exact name, but I'm paraphrasing. The church did not meet the strict criteria to be deemed a stop on the Underground Railroad. Now, there's a lot of oral history.
The church is old, isn't it? Isn't it?
Built in 1840.
Yes.
Oh,
wow.
So that would have, it was in the time period after the end of slavery in New York, but before the end of the enslavement due to the Civil War. So people who may have been escaping enslavement in the South would have come through. Now, there's thought that people came through on boats into Sag Harbor Bay and then possibly was smuggled up or down Liberty Street. No one knows quite how the street got its name. Along Liberty Street, there are some old homes. They do have also trapdoors in them. There's another home on the corner right by St. David's Church, which also had some hidden passageways and trapdoors, as well as the church. So even though there's nothing that can actually be documented, you know, the documentation consists of either having a known abolitionist who came and spoke there, something in writing, but my point is, if you are hiding escaped people, you're not necessarily going to have anything in writing. So the oral tradition is basically what we are forming our opinion of the church's role during that period in history.
Well, it certainly was an exciting, you know, adventure to even hear about that, because you don't hear really where these underground railroads actually were. So, you know, you're not, you know, it was interesting to know that the church was somehow had some connection, you know, to enslaved people, maybe. So that was, you know, for it to be known. And it's really, the name of that church is African American Episcopal
Zion Church.
Zion Church. So that's, you know, that in itself is very interesting. So, you know, Eastville is so unique in the way that, you describe it. How long, Michael, have you lived in in the Eastville area, or did you grow up there?
I grew up there for the summers. My family has started summering in Sag Harbor since 1922. My great uncle started buying up a lot of small bungalows in the Eastville area that he would rent out to people as they were building their homes in the Sands area. Now, of course, I grew up in the city. I moved out here full time about 1988, 89, somewhere like that. But I did not first live in Eastville. I didn't really want to live in Eastville. I'd built my own house further away from my family, but
Oh,
time, finances, and circumstances, I moved back down into one of the bungalows that my great uncle built, not built, acquired. It's interesting about those bungalows. They were often named after people who had lived in the Eastville area. One was called the Green Cottage, one was the Lang Cottage, one was the Parker Cottage. And speaking of the Parker Cottage, I have a painting here. Mary Parker heads to town. Now, Mary Parker was a lady who lived in the Eastville section of Sag Harbor. This would have been her home right here, the Parker Cottage. This is the Lang Cottage, and this is St. David Amy Zion Church.
oh, interesting.
So, yes, she made candy, which was how she supported herself, and she would take it in the baby buggy and go downtown to the stores downtown and sell them her wares. Now, the people who also built the home which would become the Eastville Historic Society, which is a Sears Roebuck Kid House, also sold and made and sold candy. So that apparently was some type of a money-making venture in the community, which I find fascinating. Aside from, as I said, people doing sewing and laundry, the men went whaling, of course, a lot of them. These were the ways that they supported themselves. I mean,
Very,
it's just,
very good. Very interesting. I think it's so, and again, have to say it's unique in the way that, Eastville, and I would have never, ever known anything about, Eastville. But here you are talking about such a unique place to live, and you've lived there for many years now. And your family has owned all those cottages they
yes,
owned all
yes.
those cottages. So that's remarkable, and it's a really, really nice area in there. So Eastville and your paintings, people always think that all about your professions that you've had. You've had a lot of, you're you've worked and you've done a lot of wonderful things too. I mean, I myself have even worked with you, so I
Oh,
know
yes.
the work that you do is great. But they don't associate you with being an artist or you're a painter. They don't, oh, you paint. So you have to talk about your paintings. I mean, they are, and like I had said before, that you had your own art gallery in Sag Harbor. Where was
Yes.
that at?
That was on Madison Street, almost directly across from a little cappuccino restaurant. And it was a small space. It was called John Canoe Gallery. John Canoe is an African American Caribbean
John
celebration.
Canoe.
Yes.
Oh, is
And
that African?
I believe it's initially African. They're not quite sure how the name derived. Some people said there was a character who came from Africa called Johnny Canoe,
Ah,
and it takes place usually around Christmas or New Year's. People dress up in costumes. And my birthday is New Year's Eve, so I felt a strong connection to that name. And when I had the gallery, it was John Canoe Gallery.
oh,
Yes, but
wonderful.
you're right in what you're saying, Audrey, that people usually only know one aspect of me, either my community volunteer work, one of my professional roles, or my painting. They never seem to be able to get the totality of me in one whole
No, I
shell.
mean, to sit here next to you and to know, but I also know that I've seen your exhibit, so I know
Yes.
that they're beautiful, and I know you sold a lot of your beautiful paintings. They're really nice. And you recently, I visited one of your exhibits that you had.
Yeah, that was at Sage and Madison. That was over the holidays.
Mhm.
Very nice space down in Sag Harbor. Um, the next show that I have definitely lined up will actually be next year at the Long Island Museum of American History, Art, and Carriages.
Oh,
And that's located in Stony Brook. and will be mounting an exhibit of African American artists. It will kick off with the works of Romare Bearden, and then the Sag Harbor artists will be in a separate studio space, but that won't be until February of 2023, and it will be up through August of 23.
Oh,
So,
okay. So you
yes.
have something go. I've even visited you over in Greenport, where you
Yes.
have had, an exhibit over there. So
Mhm.
you've shown quite a bit.
I've shown I'm really trying to sort of move a little further from the East End. So
Hmm.
I've exhibited in Manhattan, of course, Queens, Massachusetts. That's about it. But I want to get to this other painting here.
Yeah, I want to know. I want to ask you, Michael. Do your paintings? Do you are they about people, or you know?
Mm.
Tell us more about how you
What
come
I
about
tried to
painting these.
do is much of the area, much of African American Native history is verbal. There's not a lot of ephemera or actual written material that one can reference. So I rely, and even prior to starting doing this series, I often rely on oral history, myths, mythology, religious stories. So at one point, I just decided I was going to start working in current myths, current folklore.
Oh,
Um, this is a rendition of the Sears Roebuck House, which is the current headquarters of the Eastville Community Historic Society. Now, that was initially a Sears Roebuck kit house, and those kit houses were very popular in the early part of the 20th century, early 1900s. The materials would be trucked to the site, and the neighbors and other people would get together and construct the home. My mother's cousins-in-law, the Reed family, were actually instrumental. So this is a rendition of what it would have looked like constructing the home. Um, Again, it's a Sears Roebuck kit house, and it's called Lunchtime at Lipman's. Now,
mm,
Lipman was the family that did actually construct the home. As I said, they were candy makers, and they at lunchtime, I'm assuming, of course, because again, no one recorded anything, nobody photographed anything, so it's again my own interpretation, my own effort to bring forward the oral histories, the undocumented stories that very often people do not hear.
exactly.
You know,
I mean, to
it's
see them in paintings is just,
yes,
marvelous to see. You know, you have paintings um, of all of these, and the historical society being built and the people working,
yes.
around it. That is
Hmm.
so unique. What about this one in the front there?
This one is called Out of the Mists, and it sort of portrays two women of mixed ancestry, Native American, African American. It's actually very common across much of Long Island. You'll find these indigenous people that are mixed race, and it's a more of a subtitle could be Out of the Mists of History, but I just shortened it to Out of the Mists because it's not just necessarily history. You're also coming out of your own mental mind, your own
Mm-hmm.
mindset, also a physical coming out.
Mm-hmm.
And I, it's sort of and there's so much water here. Water features a lot in my paintings, and I just felt like the mysticism that's involved in this. It looks very simple, but there's also, and I've actually done a number of other paintings with women as these strong characters, either rowing or
Rowing, yeah,
something like
yeah.
that. Yes.
Yeah,
Hmm.
I did see one where you had a fire. There was a fire, and you said there was a fire in Sag Harbor. That,
Yes, yes.
yeah.
That
Is
was,
it all? Do you do paintings of? I'm sorry, dear.
that's all
Do
right.
did do you do paintings of? Just not in Eastville. Do you do them of
Yes,
areas in Sag
yes.
Harbor?
The painting that you're referring to is, it was referring to the Alvin Silver company that had a fire. And so it actually started in like a small little warehouse around the corner. And it was a very cold, blowing night. Actually, it was around January 1st. I forget the year, unfortunately. But I think 1870s or something in Sag Harbor. And it really consumed this huge brick structure, several other structures. And it was so cold that night, they could not put the fire up because the hoses froze. So they
Oh,
just basically had to let it burn itself out. And the next day, there was just really a few of the brick stanchions and things left of that building.
yeah.
But, I do, again, that's in line with my historical paintings.
Yeah,
Um,
so it just means so much to see, you know, paintings, you know, that to see them and they're actually, this was actually happened, or this actually,
yes,
you
yes.
know, this was in Sag Harbor, this is where that building was, this is
Mm-hmm.
where this building,
Mm-hmm.
you know, really, really nice. Michael, did you study paint? I mean, are you self-taught or, you know, I mean, I'm just saying because a lot of times people are self-taught, but are you self-taught
I'm
in
pretty
painting?
self-taught. I haven't really had a professional course since a couple of ones I had in high school.
Oh,
But beyond that, all of the techniques are mine. Every now and then I'll read something up or I'll look online and see, well, how do I get this specific technique or this image that I'm trying to portray into my work? And then even when I visualize something, it almost never comes out the way it is in my mind. I just kind of let my
unbelievable. I
brushes
mean,
take over.
unbelievable how you can come up with these paint. I mean, I've seen a lot of your paintings, exhibits where you've had, and I am just so, you know, impressed with how you come up with, you know, and how you visualize this and then you put it down. You know, it's just beautiful.
Funny you say that. People say, I wish I could live a day in your head. What's going on in there? They're so beautiful. But could we have the first slide?
And you're self-taught, and you're
Yes,
self-taught.
yes, yes, I am. This image that we're looking at right now is called Fire in the Sky. Now, I painted this last summer when we were having all of those fires in the west, the southwest, the northwest coast. And it shows the fire, the smoke that's coming from the distance. And it was sort of my take, and I was very moved by that. And if you probably recall that you could smell the smoke out here after a
Oh,
certain point, and it makes you wonder, you know, exactly how far is this smoke going to travel? What effect is it going to have on our bodies? And the image there is somewhat, it's a woman. It's somewhat reminiscent of a shingle dancer, the shawl dancers of the Native American traditions, and she's dancing across a very dry and sere landscape.
oh, wow. That is so, that's
And it's a
beautiful.
small piece. It's only about
It's
this
a
big.
small, oh,
Yes.
okay. Very nice.
Thank you.
Very
Thank
nice.
you.
Now, this one is beautiful.
This is called baleen in blue.
Ooh.
Now, baleen is a method of uh, by which whales feed themselves. Baleen is a keratin type substance. That's our fingernails. Rather than having teeth, the whales will actually take in, gulp in a lot of water, then blow it back out. And what's left behind are the squid and the krill and whatever constitutes their food diet. Now, this is a finback whale. Finback whales are typically grayish brown in color, but I did mine in blue. And you will also see in the painting there's some squid, which would represent the food items. And then the background is my take of sort of like the Minoan or Cretan cracked frescoes in the backdrop, because to me that represents history and age and sort of things that are cracked but are still alive and can still be viewed and vibrant. So I did this well as a take
Hmm.
on that, combining those two elements.
Well, you actually were director at the Whaling Museum, so was that done before or after?
I was the manager there, and that was done during my time period there.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
All right.
Hmm.
Would you like to just sum up, Michael, of your
Oh,
wonderful
sure.
careers
Thank you.
and your
Yes, yes,
wonderful
yes.
professions? It's so good to have you. And
Likewise, so it is so great seeing you. Well,
yeah,
I would like to make a plug for the Eastville Historical Society. You know, during COVID, they were going through some rough times, and they need
yeah,
to develop their list of donors again. And also, even though Eastville is still here, it's changing, much like the East End is. A lot
yeah.
of development, a lot of the older homes being notched down with larger homes being put up. So, another push for preservation, stewardship. What
Yes,
we have is what we need to maintain.
yes, exactly. Let's not lose any of our
Exactly.
unique, you
Yes.
know, wonderful places like Eastville. Let's keep them alive and, you know, um, not to leave and stay with it.
Yes.
Michael, great to see you again.
Same here, Audrey.
It's always
It's
so
always
wonderful
great.
to see you.
Yes,
And
yes.
like you said, without the mask, without
Mhm.
Zoom, without
Right.
just
Yes.
being, you know,
It's a live
to
person.
talking to you again. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
it's
very
wonderful.
interesting. Thank you so much for being here with us today and, you know, and showing your paintings and talking to us about Eastville. Really enjoyed it. And I think we have a lot more to, you know, to talk about, you know, when we talk
Yes.
about the,
Yes.
yeah.
Definitely.
So thank you so much again
Thank you.
for
Thanks for letting
coming.
me tell my story.
Yes, and it's good. Are you going to, you're going to have an exhibit soon, so,
There's another one scheduled for the autumn. Hopefully, Jennifer Cross, who just retired from the Ross School,
okay.
was the main art teacher there. She's planning to get together some of her students and her favorite people and have mount an exhibit. So I'm looking forward to that.
All right.
Yes.
Thank you again.
Thank you.